I think one of the likely possibilities of this, at least directionally, is that the more censorship we see, whether it's truckers having their contributions seized in Canada, or it's the censorship of Russia off of the SWIFT network, that is likely to stimulate more demand internationally, globally, for censorship resistant money like Bitcoin. Um,
Yes.
and, again, this is especially in the Bitcoin community, this was probably the number one prediction of your book that came to pass that really cements its prescience. And this idea of effectively what you called the ultimate offshore bank, right? I think you said when the ultimate offshore bank is open for business, or what you said, when the greatest tax haven of them all is fully open for business, all funds will essentially be offshore funds at the discretion of their owner. And that's pretty much describing Bitcoin, right? It's the Swiss bank account in your pocket, in your brain, within your circle of trust, however you choose to custody that. So maybe we could just unpack that a bit. What was the line of thinking that led you guys to predict something like Bitcoin? Again, I assumed you're writing this in like 95, 96, published in 97. So we're talking about, 13 to 15 years before Bitcoin even existed. How did you guys predict this?
Well, it seemed to me that the ingredients were right out there in public view. That you knew that you could have a high form of encryption. So I just put two and two together and got four. I thought it was one of my easiest predictions, in the sense that maybe I should have started Bitcoin instead of just predicting it. But I've thought the same thing about a number of my predictions. I predicted that the Soviet Union would collapse. And I should have gone to Ladbrokes in London and said, what odds will you give me on $1 million bet that the Soviet Union will not exist in 5 years? I could have probably could have made a huge fortune on that. But I did something else. I bought a property in St. Petersburg on the Nevsky Prospect near the Winter Palace, because the Soviets had allowed private investment in real estate at that point. And it's probably because the oligarchs wanted to be able to cash out. Mm-hmm. And the more bids they could get, the better. So I did invest in a property in the Nevsky Prospect. And in the beginning, we seemed to be doing very well. But then Putin got involved and forced us to sell. He said, well, you could keep some of it. He was the assistant to the mayor of St. Petersburg at that time. And he was in charge of foreign investment. So he made us sell, which we did. And he let us keep some of our profit. But it wasn't a huge win. It was a great idea, a great insight that had a piddling return, because I didn't spend as much time as I should have thinking about how to profit from it. Anyway, that's one of the hazards of thinking ahead. You don't do all your thinking in one. I have done pretty well in a lot of the things I thought about, but that was not one that lent itself to an easy financial reward, because the whole thing about the Soviet Union was that they didn't want people to make a lot of money. You could make money, but it wasn't on the up and up. That's why some of the oligarchs were able to steal the economy when it came to an end. The ones who were active in the underground realm were the ones who were best positioned to make money out of it. And
yeah, if I may read, so this is something, I guess this would be a second order consequence of the emergence of Bitcoin, or again, what you guys called cyber cash. And that is that you wrote that taxing authorities have grown accustomed to treating their taxpayers as a farmer treats his cows, keeping them in a field to be milked. In the digital age, or the information age, I think is what you guys called it, that these cows would grow wings. So it was, I guess, tax revenue itself, or the ability to centrally manage and derive tax revenues from a large economy is what led to the growth of the nation state as the dominant modern institution. And then through the emergence of something like anonymous digital cash, you predicted that essentially nation states going into the 21st century with all their pretensions would be starved of this tax revenue and would begin to shrink necessarily. Like, as revenues decline, clearly your business model and size decline. It's still shocking. It's still a lot to get your head around. When you say this to people today, they're very resistant to the idea, let's say. I think nationalism is very deeply embedded in most people's identity. So could you just describe to me that thought process of, you said you put two and two together to see digital cash, and then I guess you start thinking through the consequences of that. The first one is, oh wow, the largest business in the world that derives its revenue via taxation is going to be forcibly shrunk. That must have been a startling revelation for you.
well, it was a sort of startling revelation, but it was, let me say, I had a friend, an old friend who was a family friend, and a guy who was at the end of his life, but a very brilliant man who had been a Rhodes Scholar. His name was Felix Morley, and he was one of three brothers who were all Rhodes Scholars. Felix's first job when he got out of college, out of the university after his PhD, was editor of the Washington Post. He was a man of the establishment. Then he became president of Haverford College. And we used to meet for drinks, tea, every few months and talk about the way the world was tending. And he was such a smart man that it was a treat to talk to him, at least it was for me. And he had the view that communism was never going to fade away, because it was, whenever they took over a country, they kept it, and they kept getting bigger and bigger. And I kept thinking to myself, this is an illusion. When the whole picture is seen, we'll find that communism doesn't work. It's not going to take over. It's going to fall apart. And it did fall apart in a very profound way in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And in China, it went away too, but in a different fashion. Because Deng Xiaoping basically put the kibosh on Stalinism, not in the sense that he wouldn't shoot people in Tiananmen Square, but he was not going to make everything in the control of some big holding company. He wanted to give the Chinese mercantile its tradition and expression in China, and it has been extraordinarily successful, I'd have to say. So when we talked about, we saw a new digital form of money to consist of encrypted sequences, unique, anonymous, and verifiable, right out of the book. Tradable in a keystroke in a multi-trillion-dollar wholesale market without borders. Bitcoin, a decade before it came to be. I think that was a damn good call. But I'm puffing myself up. I don't mean to do that.
Well, I think you've earned it because it's spot on.
Yeah, but we had fun with it. There are a lot of things in the book that were not right, but some of the things were. And we also talked about the growth of protectionism, which I thought was going to come as a result of the backlash against globalization.
Mm. Yeah, you point out. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And also the dangers of having megalomaniacs competing for power in demagogic elections with lies and fake news. That's another one of our projections.
Yeah, that one has been on quite the rampage recently.
Yes, it had got away.
Yeah, and you guys also highlighted, that basically this monopoly on currency that governments have become accustomed to enjoying, right? Where, it's the only business in the world where you can go out and make a bunch of bad decisions, incur a bunch of debts, and then due to the monopoly on currency, you can just print your way out of it, basically. You just print money to pay all your bills and paper over your bad decisions, et cetera, et cetera. But as you, I would say, accurately predicted, now this is still playing out. Clearly, Bitcoin's still early days, but that revenue option for governments to just inflate the currency supply is being foreclosed by the emergence of something like Bitcoin.